Well, good afternoon, listeners. Thank you so much for listening to Lament of Hope podcast. It's a gift always to be able to do these interviews and bring them to you. And today I'm speaking with Irene Bedard. I'm so grateful that she's taking the time. We're recording this on Memorial Day, and she was able to make the time for it. And many of you, I don't know if you'll recognize her name necessarily, but she was the original voice for Pocahontas, the Disney animated film. And so I grew up, obviously, with all of those Disney films. And so her voice was definitely in my childhood. And, but beyond that, she has done several films. She has a production company of her own. It's called Iron Women Productions. She was just telling me about it actually before we started this. And she really has a heart for inspirational films, films that um, inspire and show aspects of the human will that are positive and stories of overcoming. The one that she's recently been a part of is called The Last Rodeo, which came out this weekend, this past weekend. And I'm going to have her talk a little bit about that with you. But she's also of Native American descent. She's Native American and she was born and raised in Alaska. And I'm also hoping to just learn more about the Native American culture. Obviously, I know there are different types, and I'm just interested to know about Native American culture in general, as I think that's not really something at least I didn't really learn much about growing up. Um, and it's always been something I've been very intrigued by. And obviously, there are films and things like that, but it's different than meeting someone who's actually Native American and hearing their experience and story. And so, Irene, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, it's an honor. I'm very, very happy to be here, especially on Memorial Day, which is very important to me and my family. As well, my entire family has served in the military. My grandfather on my mother's side was uh, born in the village of Koyuk, Alaska, and he was one of the Alaska Native young men that they plucked from the village and had us serve to fight the Japanese that had invaded Alaska during World War II. My grandfather on my father's side served in World War One,
Hmm.
and then moved his wife and family to Skowhegan, Maine, where my father was born. And my brother served 2 tours in Iraq. My other brother was a helicopter medic in the Army. My sister retired a master sergeant in the Air Force, and I'm the artist. I really appreciate this day and want to remember all those who served and who gave the ultimate sacrifice, their lives, so that we may all have the riches of living on this beautiful continent and these beautiful lands.
You know, it's interesting, Irene, and I'm gonna maybe ask and go on a tangent here, but I wanted to ask you, you know, um, we live in a society now, I think. It's been a while since my generation anyway. You know, we lived through the pandemic, which was a global thing, but we haven't really, in America, for a while experienced like a war, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's become kind of it's something that happens overseas. Obviously, it's happening now for several countries, and it's something we hear about, but it's not something we've been directly impacted by necessarily. And so that patriotic sense of honor and love for soldiers is not something I've heard of actually in quite a while, like heard someone actually talk about or say anything about. And I wanted to ask you, as all these wars are going on and there's all these discussions about peace, war, you know, violence, all of these different things, what how is it for you? Is it made you think about like patriotism and the idea of soldiers and obviously all of the people in your family who have served? How has that kind of impacted how your outlook is on life and just the fact of where we are now in our culture, where like war and soldiers and things like that, people don't like to talk about that. It's mostly a negative thing. And I wanted to know, just from your perspective, because you've been in a family where there's been service and you've seen the hardship, you've seen the sacrifice, what your perspective would be on that.
Well, Native Americans, the indigenous people of America, have the highest per capita in the United States for service in the armed forces. So it's even at all of our powwows and events across the country, the people who have served, the veterans are right there at the forefront of the grand entry. They carry the flags, the American flag and the tribal flag, the state flag, and the MIA flag often. For us, it's about protecting our mother, the Mother Earth. And so it's very much part of our our culture even.
Okay.
And so for us, it's also we remember those who have passed just in our families, those because we believe that our ancestors, our relatives, are still with us here, that we are the love of 1,000 ancestors, um, and that we remember them as well on Memorial Day. And it's really for us where you have many of the tribes, and there are 576 tribes, I think, federally recognized tribes now. I mean, there have always been more tribes, but not all of the tribes have gotten federal recognition as of yet. And um, but for all of the tribes across Turtle Island, it's just very important for us to remember our ancestors, remember those who have gone before us, and and know that they are also with us and in our bloodline and so that even my name Gudairuk, which I'm a Nupiaq and Yupik on my mother's side, I was given that name by my grandmother Irene, who it was probably one of her grandparents or grand aunties, the name Gudairuk, which means one who dropped, and we're given that name even before we're born because we bring that spirit of what they learned in their lives and kind of their responsibilities that they had. They are with us inside of us, and that's why I think we're so um, prone to join the military
Hmm.
because we have a high honor and respect for our coming generations, that understanding of deep time, that understanding that what we do affects the generations to come, 7 generations ahead, is what most of the tribes kind of look forward to the last 7 generations, like we are considered the seventh generation. And in this time will be a time of turmoil, and yet at the same time, a time of regeneration and renewal. And so my son is 22, or going to be 22 in June. And it's something that I'm concerned about. Um, I've, as I mentioned before, my youngest brother, who's 10 years, I used to call him my baby, 10 years younger than me. When he was in Iraq for those 2 tours, it was a lot of us, the families, but I know by firsthand experience the hand wringing, the worry, the concern. And so my name, Irene, means she was the goddess of peace. And so for
Hmm.
me, all of the stories, healing through the power and art of storytelling that I want to do is to bring forth understanding and make those connections, make that realization of deep time something that, we don't have to um, worry about, that we consider, um, that we consider what we do today really means something forward. Um, and really, there's a tribe down in South America that will, they'll go on they're traveling from one camp to another, or maybe it's a hunting excursion that they're on, and they have to travel across this river that where they might lose people every year. And so someone will start growing a ficus tree so that it and weaving it together, knowing that they might not ever see this bridge that will be built and woven by every generation for 80, 100 years. They really think about the well-being of the coming generations. And I just don't want our coming generations to have to suffer. And so everything that I do is in that way of really bringing forward um, healing, peace, abundance and prosperity, hope, and um, the possibilities of having clean water for our coming generations, the possibilities of of having clean air, um, having peace, and a generation that will have prosperity. And so I really, want to make sure that whatever I do, whether it's at the United Nations or speaking with different tribes or through the storytelling of film and television, that I provoke people to think about um, those possibilities as opposed to the possibilities of war. I really don't want your generation to be thinking about that. I want you to be thinking about that this is going to be a better place to be, not a worse place to be for your children.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the Native American culture treasures remembrance.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, no, I don't want to speak for every American, but I, I'm not sure remembrance is very high on the American list of importance. It's not that it's not, but I've noticed, like, especially with the Armenian generation, um, I mean, the Armenian heritage as well as the Indian heritage, there is a deep, like, remembrance for trials that they have gone through as a culture or days that are especially important. And, like, we have Memorial Day, like you said, but there is like it's just like a day off work, you
Hmm.
know, for Americans. And I think I mean, I don't want to say for everyone because obviously there are Americans who have family that have served in the military and so there would be a deeper connection for them. But I do think just typical America, I mean, there's just not really a difference. It's just a day off of work, you get to do fun things, you do a barbecue with your friends. And so I wanted to ask you from your perspective, do you think that other cultures in some ways lack from not having a deeper respect for remembrance or wanting to have those days where there actually is there's a time and there's a space made for remembrance of the past.
Well, I think it's also one way to really look at it is that understanding of deep time again. I I feel like our culture is so, you know, that we're changing our outfit every day. We're changing our hairstyle. Everything is about consumption, consuming, and changing changing into the next um, fashion. Whereas um, with traditional cultures that remember their their generations past, remember their history. Um, it's a way of keeping identity, but it's also a way of knowing that this is not something that we want to happen again for many of the occurrences. I did Spielberg's Into the West. It was a six-part miniseries, and my character lived through the Sand Creek Massacre, the Wounded Knee Massacre, the boarding schools, the Trail of Tears, all of those experiences, the railroad being built, they were all part of westward expansion in America. And um, the reason why these two particular massacres are so um, depicted is because you have generations that remember this. You have generations that have relayed that oral history through their parents and grandparents and great grandparents. They remember who was there. They remember who was lost.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think this culture doesn't have um, that deep memory, that understanding of deep time. And I think it's important um, that we have um, that we have history in our classes that reflects the true history, and that because it's important for us so that we can not make the same mistakes. That's why history is told anyway, and that we can also learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, but also learn and build upon the great examples of our ancestors. This is why we have teachers. They impart knowledge that our mothers and fathers may um, go out and work and do those things. It's not just for that. It's so that we can create full, rounded human beings um, who have the ability to um, think critically, intuitively, and um, and bring forth a stronger generation. We all want what's best for the coming generations, and we all want what's best for you and your children, as I had mentioned.
Yeah. I think one thing I've wondered is, you mentioned the Trail of Tears, you mentioned the massacres that were depicted in that film, that miniseries. And um, I have always thought, and maybe I think it's because it's been represented to me this way, maybe in the films I've watched or books I've read, that many Native Americans hold a lot of hostility toward America for the many times that America failed to treat them with dignity. Um, and I wanted to ask you, from your experience, the people you know, but also yourself, I'm not hearing that in the sense that, you said that so many of Native Americans serve the United States of America in the military. And I wanted to ask you, is that something that you've ever felt or anyone in the tribes that you have talked to, lived with? Is there an animosity at all toward America for the past? Since there's such a rich remembrance of these things, they would be very close still because you're remembering them keenly and you have family members who would remember a grandparent or a great great grandparent who had shared their experience with them. How does that impact you as a Native American? Like, that America made these mistakes in some of these incidences, but you live in America as well, and you're serving the American government knowing they've made mistakes in the past. Does that impact you at all or make you upset or anything like that?
Well, I think, and we can, like, for instance, The Green Veil, which is a four-part miniseries that I co-executive produced with John Leguizamo. It's on a new streaming app called The Network. It's a story about the um, the systemic abduction of Native children from their families and homes to go to the boarding schools to kill the Indian, save the man. Um, these methods that were utilized from the Trail of Tears to the building of the boarding schools was this were the same methods that the Germans used to eradicate the Jews. And it really was about assimilation and eradication. And so we do have multi-generational trauma. My mother went to the boarding schools. My son just learned about that from me when he was applying for scholarships. Um, the boarding schools, some of them still exist, but now they're run by Indigenous peoples. But some of them are relics of what so many suffered from physical abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse. That many of the churches ran these, many of the, but most of them were government sanctioned. All of them are government sanctioned. Not necessarily all were government run. And so there is this multi-generational trauma that exists. But ultimately, we're resilient. And, they estimate that there were 100 million or so Indigenous people in North America. And, just a few decades ago, we had dwindled down to 1.7 million. And that population is on the rise, as well as the younger generations really embracing from fashion to storytelling, writing, and and work within their communities to rebuild that sense of safety and quality of life for the coming generations. And so I see a resurgence, a renaissance, so to speak, of indigenous cultures, indigenous languages, which are still disappearing, today, but many are also doing language immersion in their schools, in their nursery schools and schools. And there are many adults who are learning more about the traditional cultural like arts um, and so and foods, gathering of foods and the hunting and subsistent hunting and fishing lifestyle um, are still eh, being utilized up in the state of Alaska and in other parts of the country as well. But you still have many places that are basically a third world country in the middle of our country, places that don't have even running water or electricity. And yet native indigenous people are so proud of where they come from and um, resilient in keeping that culture and those lifestyles um, available for those who go out into the world and want to come back, or who stay there and don't want to leave. And so I think it's really amazing where we're at, but I still think that there's a lot that can be healed. And I think a lot of that has to do with, as you said earlier, how we're just not necessarily learning about this stuff in our younger years in school. All I ever heard about was the story of Pocahontas, and this who was, why she was there was because of what was, the piece of Pocahontas, basically.
Yeah.
And Squanto, that was my very first movie. That was a Disney movie that I did. and he was there at the first Thanksgiving. And so these stories are the manifest destiny characters. That this is these are Native American people in the history books, Sacagawea being one of them as well, who took Lewis and Clark across the country to um, as a young mother, carrying her child on her back. Um, she was still she's still revered, not only in our cultures but in American history books as well. But there are so many other stories that yet to be told, and that's why I'm really happy to be on the end of producing with Iron Woman Productions. It's telling these stories, but telling them, you know, in a way that is good news, that it's a beautiful life version, that we're being able to tell these stories that might be difficult, but that they're done in a way where we can look at life, the true history, and then also how who we are now and who we are today,
Hmm.
and things like science fiction, like what we would be like in the future, um, or uh, or romance and comedy. I mean, all these things, these ways, these versions of storytelling that are positive and beautiful, and really shine a light on what is amazing about Indigenous cultures. Now, I truly believe in my heart that all of us are Indigenous. We all came from places and from peoples that had a relationship to the earth, had a relationship to our ancestors and the elders, had
Hmm.
a relationship to coming generations. Um, uh, had stories and songs and drums, and a true understanding of what it means to revere the creatures of the planet, the water that we drink, the air that gives us life. These We all came from those peoples. We all came from peoples that 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 had all of those things, and that just means to be human. Like, Inupiaq, and Yupik. My grandfather asked me when I left to go to college, um, what I thought Inupiaq meant. And, we're of the Eskimoan people, or the Inuit people. And so that's what I thought that it meant. And he said, no, it just means human being.
Hmm.
We're beings that live on this planet, and we live for in the realm of the infinite, just a blink of time. And but what goes long is that line of our ancestral knowledge and strength and wisdom and beauty and promise and hope for the coming generations. And so I think that it's really just a matter of remembering again, um, the that we are all just human beings. We're just tiny human beings on the face of a giant planet that's tiny in an infinite universe. So,
Yeah. No, it's true. But I think that's the thing is, one reason why I started this podcast is because I, I, there's so much conflict and controversy between different people, not because they've discussed anything, but because they go, "Oh, you're this and I'm this, so we can't talk," or "You're this and I think this, therefore we can't discuss because there's no point." And that just And I thought about that before, and that's something I was like more too. I don't know, just a couple years ago, very much like, well, this person thinks this, I think this, therefore we will have nothing to talk about, so we shouldn't talk. And as time has gone on and I've done this podcast and I've talked with people, like I have learned so much, I have cried, I have laughed with so many people who we don't think all the same way about a lot of things.
mhm,
But we're human, and we both have experienced loss. We've both experienced joy. And it's incredible when you get to have that moment with somebody where it's just like you get to interact, like two humans get to talk. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And it's so interesting how you're really emphasizing the fact that, you know, whether you're Native American, whether you're not, wherever you come from, you are still human.
Mhm.
And that is a connection that everyone has, and I think that's so important to remember. And I guess I've just always been raised, I always thought that so many different groups that have been hurt by different people have this animosity, and then it makes it harder to talk. So I've wondered at times, like I've always wanted to talk more with Native American people, but I've not been exposed to many Native American people, and where I live especially too, like I haven't talked with any. But I've always wondered, like, will they want to talk with me because I'm a white person? And like, will they want to talk about, just anything, or would they even appreciate it if I asked them how they felt about certain things? Because I wasn't sure. I've always kind of been raised, or I always thought that like Native Americans would be very angry about all the things that had happened to them because they were originally here before we came. And
Mhm.
so it was kind of like, I was like, I don't know if I could even have a conversation, like if that would be something that the person would be open to. And so it's interesting to hear from you because your perspective is very much like, well, we're all human and we've all been sinned against and hurt against by somebody. And it's important to remember those things, but it's also important that we think forward and we want to help other people not experience the same things that we experienced that were bad. And that's very, it wasn't what I was expecting. To be honest, I wasn't sure.
Well, I think part of the work that I was doing at the United Nations with the American Indian Enterprise and Business Council was to bring forth these ideas about, this, I wasn't the only Indigenous person that was there. There is the Indigenous conference as well at the United Nations, and where Indigenous peoples from around the world come and talk about what our elders are saying. What it looks like. We are at the forefront of climate change. We see the effects of the glaciers melting, or the loss of water, or all of our indigenous peoples are still very close to the land, and so the Secretary Ban Ki-moon put us at the forefront of the climate march simply because of that fact that we have we have such a close relationship with our planet still. And I think that we, in another way, um, have a unique ability to be able to be there and be present for the building of the bridges, as opposed to looking at things in a way um, where you are so different from me. We instead are disenfranchised to a certain extent, and therefore, in some ways, because of not belonging here or there, not or being a part, of having our feet into two different worlds, we're uniquely positioned to have to try to see things from a different point of view. Speaking languages, our languages are not just a translation of words, they're a way of viewing the universe. And so losing those indigenous languages is also losing, that deep and abiding relationship with the earth and all the plants on it, and the medicinal ones, the poisonous ones, the understanding of um, the ocean waters, and being able to see that, this type of seaweed is not growing anymore, or this coral reef is dying. I mean, so many of these things were noticed by Indigenous peoples first. Um, but out of it, though, uh, we can present from a humanity point of view, as opposed to from a point of view that makes it an us versus them, or you and us kind of way of looking at things, that that you know we're really insistent on making things better for our daughters. The idea that this age that we're in now is the age of the daughters, and it's not necessarily about feminism. It's about imbalance and bringing balance back between the masculine and the feminine, and that, this time that we have coming forth is really about uplifting our young women, and that we're just spirits on a human journey, and that we're all related, that Mitakuye Oyashi is the Lakota way of saying that we are so intertwined, that they even science is talking about this, the butterfly effect, that if a butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the planet, that it creates a great wind on this side, and by the time it reaches here, that we're all so interconnected. I mean, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, um, you can look at plants and um creatures and wine that came from before then, and you see them, you see it, like from now, from when those two bombs were dropped, um, the the radioactive isotope, that cesium 128 or 38, something like that, um, that isotope is in every living creature now. So every blade of grass, my dog, it's in your hair, it's in your nails, it's in your DNA now. Um, and so even something that horrible still shows how interconnected we all are. And this is why it's so important. This is why um, we have the Indigenous people, and the white buffalo calf pipe carrier, um, started World Peace and Prayer Day, so that we can all, as a collective, come together on one day and really put our thoughts, our mindfulness, our send our spiritual message out into the universe, to just to know that we are a collective, that all the creatures on the planet are we call them our relatives. The trees, they are our relatives. The sun, which gives us this life that we live, is our grandfather. This water is we're made of 76 percent water, as so is the earth. It's made of 76% water.
Yeah.
The you know the fact that a monarch butterfly goes to the same place, and and even to just the thought that when it's in its cocoon, we see the caterpillar eating and eating, and I used to think it was like hungry hungry caterpillar, where it would just fat, and go in the cocoon, and then pop out a wing and pop out another wing, and pop out the little antenna. But no, that's not what happens. It becomes the stuff of life, a primordial sludge, um, stem cells. The scientists still don't know how it does it, but it is a true metamorphosis. And there are so many amazingly wonderful, beautiful, um, almost alien sounding things that we have as part of this one planet that we're on. that we're still learning about. We've gone and out into space, to the moon, to Mars, but we still have yet to fully explore our own oceans. And there's so much to be looked at in that way of wonder, of amazement, of beauty, and I think that's so. I have a movie out called The Last Rodeo that's out in theaters this weekend, and um, it's a story about faith, and different ways to kind of come to that. And it's a story about healing, and it's a story about um, uh, the human spirit and how the human spirit can just really like overcome so much, even our bodies, even um, uh, our pain and suffering can bring forth something amazing and beautiful. And it was really, it's really also just a wonderful thing to be able to put a story out that is about that, that is about the human spirit, us spirits in a human body. This life is a gift given to us to learn, and we're supposed to make mistakes. But we're just little infinitesimal human beings, and but we're also infinite because of our spirits, and the human spirit is resilient. And I think that's the most important thing to remember when we're dealing with all the things that are indigenous, but simply put, just humanity.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially when you're talking about the Native American culture's concern for the environment. I mean, ever since you learned about the Pilgrims, I mean, you know that the Indians were teaching
Mhm.
the Pilgrims how to plant, and you know that Native Americans have always had a deep knowledge of, as you said, medicinal plants, plants that are not good for you. And obviously, they had to have some form of medicine, before we have like doctors now and all of this. And now we're not even sure always that the drugs we have are good for us.
Mhm.
But I do want to ask you, I'm curious. It's been a long time since I've seen the Disney Pocahontas, so forgive me, I may be wrong here, but I remember when I did see it, I remember the music being beautiful, and I remember obviously Pocahontas sticks out so firmly in your mind, what she looks like, how she sounds. Um, but from what I remember, it wasn't completely, if not that historically accurate, the way that they made the story. And I wondered, from your perspective, since you are Native American and Pocahontas is Native American, and that's part of your story, was that hard for you at all, that being in that film and lending your voice to it and becoming such an iconic childhood film for so many wasn't as accurate a portrayal of the Native American experience as you would have liked it to be?
Well, definitely, I have definitely walked a tightrope, that's for sure. But I
Yeah,
will,
I guess that's true.
but what I will say about that is, um, Eric and Mike, the directors, they really did work alongside me. Um, at one point, we had even done some drawing mock-ups of Pocahontas being 11 or 12, because that's how old she was when John Smith came, when the first time she saw someone Caucasian.
Yeah.
Um, and what I do appreciate are really, though, her being 11 and stopping a war from happening was like why she made it into the history books, being this young girl who was brave enough. And we all have the ability to be heroes and heroines. Um, it's just a matter of having had that will, that opportunity, and to do something for the betterment of others. Even though it could be at the detriment to your own health and safety. Even in the face of fear, it's still something that a person does. That's why our military are considered heroes. Um,
Right.
this is why our firefighters are considered heroes because they put their own lives at risk to ensure the safety and health and well-being of others. And but I think what really was important in the story, which was this relationship to the earth, grandmother Willow and her father representing her relationship to the elders, her representing the relationship to the coming generations, and also that understanding of that peace is of utmost important over hate, that um, to be able to listen to each other and um, even in the face of that we may not understand each other's words, but if we look each other in the eyes and we see the humanity first, those all those things were represented, um, including also that what is important is not gold. What is important isn't how much money you make or what kind of clothes you have or what kind of house you have or car you drive. What's important is what's in your heart and the person that you are inside and what you do with this that you have in between your your ears here, and you are the only you to exist from the beginning of time to the end of time. You're the only one who sees through your eyes, so that we all each have our own path. And all um, those lessons were given to a whole generation. And another thing that I said at the time, and that I still say today, because I hear people and teachers coming to say, well, I just discovered that it wasn't, the true story. And they're like, well, I'm going to teach my class the true story of Pocahontas. And so that's any form of communication that brings forth um, passion and emotion, um, and gives people the impetus to do something about it is a good thing. So I have to look at it as an overall plus.
Well, yeah, because you're saying the values, a lot of the values that you cherish were in
Mhm.
the film,
Yeah,
even if historically it wasn't accurate.
yeah.
Um, and that definitely makes a lot of sense. And obviously, Pocahontas is not the only film to do that. There are so many films that have depicted so many historical things that have taken licenses or changed this or changed that for certain reasons. Um, I want to ask you, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm curious. You mentioned the boarding schools earlier, and I do know that um, several times in history, missionaries would go to another country with the intent to westernize as well as share the gospel, and they really believed that, you know, the Indian or whether it be another indigenous group or whether it just be anyone that was not westernized needed the gospel, was a heathen, and therefore must be, where start wearing clothes, start looking Western, start adopting the faith, forced conversions. Those things did happen. Um, and I definitely believe there were some missionaries with good intent, but a lot of what happened of forced conversion, all of this, it's not, first of all, it's not biblical, but secondly, it's not you can't force someone to convert like that. That's not how it works. It has to be something the person wants to do and believes in their heart. You can't force someone to convert. I wanted to ask you, as a Native American, is it hard at all to discuss Christianity or to find common ground with someone who says they're a Christian because of the fact that you know that Native Americans in the past did receive poor treatment
Mhm.
from people who came claiming Christ, who didn't show him the way they should have?
Well, it goes back. centuries to the doctrine of discovery by the Catholic Church, which went uh, out into the world and exploration with this scepter of, um, I'm the only way and I'm the light, which is great. But also, if at that time in particular, and actually through the centuries, so much has been done by the inequities of man, and that means the iniquities, the inequities, um, the harsh reality of violence, the harsh reality of uh, well, if these groups did not accept the way, then it was okay to murder. It was
Right.
okay at the explorers to rape. So there were a lot of issues at hand, and there were a lot of problems that occurred due to various uh, various manifest destiny type of thought processes. Instead of reaching out to people with the love and the kindness and and um, and the humanity of Jesus, the humanity of so many of the um, people of faith in general, um, whether it be wisdom, um, whether it be enlightenment or the bulletproof, um, or the walked on water. People who, the man walked on water. Moses parted the seas. Crazy Horse was bulletproof. I think to really just look at that that so many peoples of the world have lived over millennia since the beginning of time and have uh, found so many different paths to um, Great Spirit, to the Creator of the universe, to find, the same tenets of do unto others, um, and and to realize that all of them are about love. All of them are about love and not fear and 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 not violence. Um, I think if we can look at each other as more the same than different, as you had mentioned earlier, that like it's hard to think about going out into the world and um and extending that hand, because people seem to be butting heads so much. Um, I think it's important to open that ear a little bit more and listen and look people in the eyes and listen. You'll see whether they are a human being or not a human being. That's what my grandfather said when I went off to college. What does a new back mean? Just means you are a human being. Just know that you are a human being and you are worthwhile and worth the the space that and the air that you breathe, the space that you are and the air that you breathe. So hold your head up high and look people in the eyes. Now that was a big deal because for us, the many indigenous people, it's especially young people. It's not necessarily um, it's a cultural thing that you don't like stare at people, you don't point, and you don't maybe necessarily keep that gaze when you're looking at your elder. You kind of look toward the ground in humility. Humility is one of my Inupiaq values, but so is humor. So, um, you know,
It's a good combination.
um, I don't think that we would have survived without our humor. And I think humility is something that this greater society could maybe try to work on a little bit more.
No, yeah, I mean, you're right. Everyone. It's very interesting what you said before about man's iniquity, his fallenness. It's true. Um, but it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't, is it not hard for you then at all to talk about Christianity or Jesus? That's not something that causes you any sort of angst?
My father was, he was Métis Cree. His father was French Canadian and his mother was Cree. And she was baptized, so we don't know her, her given name from birth. Um, and I think she was baptized. My father was one of, I believe, if I remember correctly, like she had born 17 children, but
Oh,
only
wow.
11 survived to adulthood. And but my father was the one they chose to be the priest. And so my father growing up taught me very much about the different religions and and he spoke Latin, he spoke um French, but he only spoke English in the house. But no, so I've always been a very spiritual person. And like as I mentioned, I mean, I believe that there are many ways to find our great spirit in heaven, but I'm definitely a spiritual person. I studied physics and philosophy, and my whole reason those two degrees together was
Hmm.
was I wanted to explore the creator in our universe, and where we can find those at the very quantum level and at the expansive infinite level, and how those follow and flow through us with sacred geometry, with um with our quantum, with there's a Einstein had called something, he called it non-distant energy or spooky action at a distance. And basically, when two ions meet, when they separate, they could be a millimeter apart or a universe apart. But when one changes over to an electron simultaneously at the same time, the other one will change over to electron, no matter how close or far away they are apart. So for some reason, when we touch, we do become one. And there are, many aspects to this that I see throughout all the history and storytelling of humankind, in all the books and stories retold and told again by men. All said, God is God, to each a soul. This life's to learn, and that's the word, love. Love one another. Um, it I and I many native cultures really embraced Christianity. As a matter of fact, when my father passed away and we landed in the village, and from every direction people came in dog sleds and snowmobiles, and they picked us up and they brought us to the church, and we sang songs in Inupiaq and Yupik, in the Covenant Church, and they gave us my father a 21 gun salute too, for when they buried him in the frozen ground, when we buried him in the frozen ground. But yes, so many of our cultural cultures embrace Christianity still. Um, Throughout the learning, but have made it somewhat their own. And through that lens, through that culture, many of our cultures had to go underground to maintain our own spirituality as well, all the while still doing um, uh, life through the eyes of Christianity. So there's a balance again. I think that is there still, and a balancing act that is there still.
Yeah, that's
And I think
interesting.
some of that balance is toward the end of Indigenous spirituality is still looking to be maintained.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I'm wondering, as you're saying that, I'm wondering if it's so much that, and obviously we can't generalize because each Native American is his own person and so forth. But from what you're saying, I would wonder if maybe many Native Americans do perform Christianity or do things that would be considered Christian, but it's not maybe they like those things, but they still hold to their traditional beliefs. And so the
Hmm.
Christianity hasn't replaced that for them. It may just be something that there are things in Christianity that they find
Hmm.
that align, that they really like to incorporate, but it's not the same as their own traditional beliefs that are
Yeah,
hardcore what they believe.
yeah, but I think it's both. It's both and, so just like, celebrating Memorial Day is going and spending time with your family and remembering those who gave their lives for this land that we live on, just in the same way that we would celebrate Memorial Day maybe differently than the rest of culture does. So, yeah, it's both and.
Yeah.
There are people, it's true, individuals and mostly that cannot abide Christianity for what Christianity has done to um, the indigenous people of North America, of Turtle Island. But there are many who don't. And so it's really just a matter of the person you're asking, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Irene, I want to be respectful for your time. I'm looking at the time, I'm like, oh my gosh. The last thing I want to ask you is, I know you said your humor, and that is something you mentioned earlier that you don't know how Native Americans would have survived without their humor. Do you have a humorous tale or story that's been passed down in your family that you would be able to share with the audience listening?
Hmm. Let's see. I mean, I can think of a few. I'm not, I should, uh, um, but my grandfather would, like every time I saw him, he just made people laugh. He was still joking with the nurses on his deathbed in the hospital. Just flirting with them and joking with them and it's really just about being together and making each other laugh in all things, whether I do know that when I get around Indigenous people in general, like, we sit around, have some food, enjoy each other's company, and our cheeks hurt and our bellies hurt just from making each other laugh over whatever it is. It might be an auntie story, or it might be, uh, you know, there isn't, there are, those stories that are kind of funny about the Arctic fox because the fox is the trickster, and stories about Raven. Also, Raven is a trickster as well. And, um, but for the most part, it's about our interactions with each other. So,
So
yeah,
you just, as a culture, value laughter.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Irene, it's been such a gift. Thank you for talking with me. And I obviously there's so much more to learn and to talk about, but I'm really happy to have gotten a window into Native American and Native American culture. And you also have articulated everything so well, and you seem very sweet. And so I'm very grateful to have connected with you. And thank you for the films that you make to contribute to the world that get to tell stories that inspire, but that are also relatable, like you said, about the human experience, things that people can connect to. And
Mhm.
so, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having this platform and bringing up inspiration.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Irene. I hope you have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.